welcome to our webinar on designing actionable environmental data solutions. Great to see a few familiar faces today and also some new ones. My name is Marie Geneste. I'm the co-founder of the Seek Collective. So a few just points of order. We're going to share the materials and the presentation with you. We're also recording this webinar, and we will be also offering some free UX consultations if you are building some cool and environmental data solutions. So intros, keep on the intros through the chat, job title, company, any challenges that you may have or any questions that you have for us for today. Let's do our own intros. So I'm the co-founder and managing partner at the Seek Collective. I've been working in marketing and design for probably over 15 years in international marketing, user experience, and sales. I started my career working with blue chip companies, and I'm now working mainly with startup organizations in the B2B and B2C space. And I founded the Seek Collective to focus only on organizations with positive social and environmental impact. I also happen to be an environmental science educator, and because I facilitate workshops or learning experiences around climate change, biodiversity, and planetary boundaries. So I'm really passionate about bringing people and planet-centered approaches to product design and marketing. And I will hand over to you, Joe, for your intro.
Thank you, Marie. Yeah, I'm Joe. I'm the UX designer at Seek Collective. Been working now for 15 years in UX, predominantly on digital experiences, but not only, sometimes physical experience as well. I work with early career big corporates such as Audi and Games and GSK. A couple of years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, moved more to helping startups, especially in the positive impact space, to help them create their products, understand their users, and release things to market. Started working with Marie 2 years ago now, Marie, I think it was, and working predominantly on environmental and climate tech now. And my passion is really to help founders and entrepreneurs really get their products launched and working correctly and being successful in terms of creating positive impact.
Thanks, Joe. So a few words about our organization at the Seek Collective. We're a UK-based consultancy with clients in Europe and North America. Some of her are in the room today, some of them, so that's great. We support impact entrepreneurs that are scaling sustainable solutions through people and planet-centered design and marketing. And we also help more traditional business leaders that are trying to be regenerative and have net positive impact. So our services revolve around 2 pillars for impact entrepreneurs. So we help on design, which is strategy, user experience, UX, and UI. So we design, test, or optimize products, services, websites, and end-to-end user experiences so that they work both for people and planet. And we also help on marketing, strategy, and operations. And as for like more conventional businesses, we also help them with environmental awareness workshops on climate, biodiversity, planetary boundaries. And we also use our design toolkit to help them shift towards regenerative business models for some or all of their business. So we're very excited today because this webinar is going to tap into all of those 3 pillars of our work. The agenda, Joe.
The agenda today, we're going to focus on the common problems we've encountered with our teams we work with, and how they haven't been successful in creating impact and how we help them. Focused on methodologies we use and hopefully help people in the chat. Lean UX predominantly is what we use, and we'll go through how that can help, specifically with climate tech, and then how we use planetary boundaries as a design lens also to go even further. And we've got a couple of case studies to discuss and hopefully time for a Q&A at the end.
Hopefully. So the principles and case studies that we're going to discuss today should be relevant to all types of environmental data platforms, environmental monitoring, LCA, MRV, carbon management, compliance platforms, and also public engagement tools like air quality monitoring. However, there's no one size fits all. what will matter is really engaging your specific users in the path to action, whether they are climate scientist or chief sustainability officer or a concerned citizen. So it's really important that the approach is specific to the different audiences and personas that you are trying to engage. So what's the problem? So we know there's a lot of data. We're super lucky that technology has enabled us to get way more environmental data. But is environmental data a necessary condition to environmental action? The answer is probably yes. But is it a sufficient condition? The answer is actually no. So we have more environmental data than ever before in human history, but we are still not managing as a society or as a civilization to tackle rampant environmental and social issues. So when we look at what people are thinking today and their attitudes to climate and environmental collapse, I should say, whether there's some variations recently, and things can vary from a country to another, but overwhelmingly people are concerned. And that's usually 70, 80%, depending on which surveys you look at. But the problem is, first, people don't always know what they can do. And if they do know, they don't necessarily do it. So there is not enough action, not enough change to the point that our life supporting systems are on red alert. So the whole challenge we're going to explore today is how to bridge this intention, action, impact gap with better designed and actionable data. So first this is one way to structure what needs to be done. And what we'll see is that this road to actionable insight or actioned insight is actually paved with 1,000 pitfalls. From how we capture and process the data in a comprehensive, accurate way, how we bring it to life through visualization, and how we link it to concrete action, so actionable insight. And last but not least, how you make sure the action has happened and impact is being demonstrated, so that you have this kind of positive feedback loop where when you see your impact is happening, it's measured, you also are more motivated to go into more action. So this is the feedback loop that we're trying to achieve. But it can be achieved, and this is the story that Joe is going to share with you.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. We want to start with a success story and just want to set the scene. Maybe many people know about it already. Global Forest Watch. That's a platform that focuses on monitoring forests around the world, looking at tree cover loss, the grid degradation, fires, etc., across the planet. Firstly, just on a platform point of view, it's an open platform. There's no login needed. You can go, anyone can go in and look at it. It's very successful at being easy to use for people that aren't clued up on the different aspects and on the scientific side, but also very easy to go deeper very quickly if you are looking for specific data points. They have a huge user growth. They to 2 million by 2019. They now also hit almost 4 million active users, and that's obviously an indication that they're doing something very right with their design side and their visualization side. But what they're truly successful at is creating the measurable impact at the end. So they work very closely with partners and organizations and communities to really measure the impact of actions that are taken based on the data they provide. And that loop is super, super important for success on any environmental impact project. So the question isn't whether environmental data can drive action, it's actually how to design for the action and to make sure that positive impact is happening based on your data. So we want to focus on a couple of key challenges that we commonly see in these types of data. And as Marie alluded to earlier, a lot of people have the reflex that people don't take action because they don't have enough data. But actually, is that the right reflex? We don't think so. And we don't tend to see that. Actually, there's quite a lot of evidence that this is not the right approach. And often with more data, there's actually less action. With Maurice here sitting, looking at the fire, not doing much about it, being a lot of users. And there's some key psychological barriers that you have to overcome fundamentally as well, to create action. And maybe Marie, you can talk a little bit more about that.
Indeed. So first, I think we tend to assume that people will understand the data, and this is something we'll talk about later. And second, we assume that people will rationally act on it, and this is definitely not happening. The reality is very different. People are sort of predictably irrational. So when you look into behavioral and evolutionary psychology as social scientists, sciences, they teach us that there are huge barriers to action, and especially in the realm of sustainable action. So I'm not going to cover them all into details, but for instance, there is the distance barrier. So remote problems are not acted upon because we can't really see them, as they are far off in space and also in time. Then you have the doom barrier. So when you have negative framing of climate change or other environmental collapse through cost, loss, sacrifice, this kind of creates a need for people to simply avoid topics, and people feel helpless, and then the fear message kind of backfires into inaction. Then you have cognitive dissonance. I don't think I need to explain this. You have also denial. So denial is a kind of refuge from fear and guilt, a sort of self-defense mechanism, and not really based on ignorance and intelligence, but it doesn't drive action for sure. And then last but not least, you have this identity barrier. So we tend to filter things out through professional and cultural identity. And so we look at for sort of confirmation bias and information that confirm our existing values and notions, which means that we also tend to filter out facts that would make us change our identity, or just because they are given to us by the wrong messengers, we don't take them into account. So the challenge is to bypass those barriers through the design process. And the good news is that we have a few, like maybe 3 critical failure points that we can work on, just like acupuncture points, to overcome many of these issues and challenges.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, so the 3 critical failure points we want to focus on, especially on the design and user point of view, is data and UX complexity. Obviously, by nature, the environment data is super complex, so you have to make sure that it's clear that there's no actionable steps to use the data and then move forward and create positive impact, and also missing feedback loops to create that behavior change and make them understand the impact of their actions, and then keep a loop going of actually, okay, retake those steps and retake those actions. So they're the 3 ones we want to focus on today. So starting with the first one, dive a bit deeper. Users tend to very commonly can drown in information very quickly. We see that from a behavioral psychology point of view, there's often half a second really for your unconscious brain to look at something, go, yeah, I understand that. Okay, I can consciously engage. Also, oh no, I'm overwhelmed, I'm switching off. So you've got literally not much time. So especially it's getting that attention span is getting shorter these days. And you consider air data quality. I know some people that are tackling that at the moment in the call. And that's very complex. So you have like PM 2.5, nitrogen oxide, ozone, volatile organic compounds, all measured in different units, all across different time frames, different locations. So it's super complex, and it's very easy to mass dump that on a user and create a very complex and overwhelming situation. And the real trick is to make sure that we design optimally to not overwhelm people too early and make them work too hard. And also on top of that, poor mobile experiences, especially if the data needs to be used on the ground in locations that have poor connectivity, maybe device access is limited, that they don't optimize for that situation. So much the user context there. And we have an example on the next slide of one visualization that looks very pretty at first glance and nicely designed, but has some critical problems. It kind of requires prior knowledge. So if you do have that and don't have that, then that's going to be an issue in terms of understanding the scales. There's also a scale issue in terms of this is showing countries across the globe that have vulnerability to climate changes. And some of those are very small dots you can't even see. So that's a fundamental problem. There's no geological grounding apart from the color code and the key, but you don't understand the geographical relationship between the dots, which could be fundamental for your work. And there's no customization or filtering options, so you can't tailor it to your needs, and there's no actual steps to take from it. So this is also just one graph. Imagine if you've got 15, 20 of these, it's very quickly overwhelming for someone and unusable.
So failure point number 2 is not having a clear connection to the data and actionable steps. So it's basically not answering the what can I do problem, what's in it for me and what could I do based on the data. So it's really about systems design, and not assuming that your users will understand the data. That was the point number 2, and not assuming that they will naturally rationally act upon it. So it's really about bringing together the data visualization and the decision frameworks. So we need to stop expecting users to understand the dots and also join the dots. We need to help them. We need to help them do it by linking up the information with some behavioral triggers, basically. And again, an example on air quality monitoring. So this is like just a screenshot from a solution, I think, in India. And there's hundreds of similar examples, but basically it says, 152. Okay, what does that mean? Is that PM 2.5? What does that even mean? So maybe some people are very used to reading these because they live in the city and they are health aware. But in a way, this information is pretty meaningless without an action related to it, such as stay indoors or wear a mask or postpone outdoor activity. So just to reinforce that awareness, creating awareness to a problem without creating agency leads to this helplessness and doesn't lead to action. This is where we really need to make sure that we're designing not only for scientists, but also designing for the people that need to act upon the data. And in this particular case, it's your average citizen. Okay, well, that's a very good example not to follow.
Yeah, the third challenge really gets the heart of the behavioral psychology and the behavioral problem. Even when we solve the visualization problem, maybe you have actions and actionable steps that you help the user with. Ultimately, knowledge doesn't automatically translate to that action. The science is clear. Environmental attitudes only predict behavior in low-cost situations. So when personal cost is increasing, or whether that's time, money, convenience, the attitude and behavior correlation breaks down entirely. So if you're not, the users aren't really, if that takes them a lot of time, a lot of energy to understand the data, take action, and also then understand the impact of it by themselves, they have to do the work themselves, they're going to stop doing that action. And research from Bath University showed that information-based interventions tend to be less effective at changing behavior or creating action. So if you only do the data side and the visualization side, you're probably not going to get a lot of action. And this is why you can build the most beautiful environmental data dashboards in the world. But if you don't and not see any behavioral change because you're not designing for it, you're not facilitating it. So the ultimate question is, how do we design for action and understand and design for the desired impact action first, not the data and the infrastructure of the data first. So always design for the impact and action. And the traditional design process is quite bad at doing this. I think the difficulty with environmental data has very unique constraints and a lot more complex than most projects. So as many of you are aware, it's multidimensional, temporal data. So it could go across like real time and decades. There's life and death consequences to it. So the actual impact is very high, potentially. And regulatory compliance can be very complex, especially if you're looking at cross-border products and processes. There's a balance between the scientific rigor of the data and the complexity of it versus the emotional connection from a human perspective, and enabling people that aren't scientific to engage as well. Often the thinking is one-dimensional. It's like what the pixel look like on the screen, and the technology is not necessarily thinking end-to-end in terms of experience. I mean, this is outside of control, but you're having to fight disinformation and misinformation all the time, as everyone's aware. So there's a lot of barriers here, a lot of complexity. And traditional UX assumes that you have kind of simple user goals, you figure those goals out, You have business goals, then you move to what the success metrics are, and then you build and design. But that fundamentally doesn't work for environmental because it's, you need behavior change, you need system thinking, you need collective action to have a successful product and service. And the traditional flow that we had earlier, the capture, visualization, actionable insight, action insight, is traditionally the design process as well for a new product. So you look at how technology, how you're going to capture it. Maybe you have that already, and that's where the starting point is. You look at how to visualize the data, and then you look at the actionable insight and the actions required afterwards. The problem with that is if you design that way, you have to build a lot of complexity, a lot of wastage, and that kills the momentum that a user might have through the process. And if you're not designing to increase the momentum, your dashboard is probably going to not drive a lot of action. So let's explore a little bit, maybe a better methodology for creating environmental data, and that's Lean UX. We apply that to our projects, have applied it to environmental data, which we'll show you a bit later in some case studies. And why we think Lean UX is good for climate tech? Well, it's all about reducing waste, both from a practical point of view, but also from a method point of view. And you focus on testing assumptions early, you create hypothesis, you focus on the target audience, the intended action first, and then you go from there. You build out the leanest minimal product first, test hypotheses, and move forward with hopefully the correct solution. In terms of a bit of theory, how traditional lean UX is structured is that you focus on the base of the pyramid first, which is the target customer and the audience you're focusing on, understand them deeply, and also, as Marie said earlier, the psychological barriers that are involved with them, and the intended action you want them to take ultimately with the service you're providing. Look at their unmet needs. Why are they not taking that action currently? And then you will look at, okay, here's our value proposition, here's how we're going to do it. Then look at data integration and finally the actual experience, the visualization afterwards. And that hopefully you test that iteratively very fast and hopefully get product market fit afterwards. However, this lean process of think, build, learn is very good for simple products and works very well on many products. But there's a question you're probably asking yourselves potentially of where do you factor in the social and environmental impact that you're going to have, because this is very much people-centric and user-centric, but it's not necessarily wide enough. So what we've done is we use Lean, but we also add a layer to it, which is the social and environmental impact. And we actually start mapping that before we move forward with any sort of infrastructure or designing work. And that block maps then the impact, both positive and negative, that your product's going to have on the social and environmental side, and how you're going to measure that to be able to create that loop back to your target customer audience to increase the momentum of them taking action. And that layer looks at, we call it the responsible layer. So then the base layer is anything that's desirable, making sure that people want the product and are going to use the product, and that it's going to achieve the goals that it's going to achieve. And then you can start scoping it, requirements, building and designing and iterating on that. We call this then the impact product fit. And how practically you do this in Lean is you can use in the social and environmental layer specifically, you can use non-human personas, which are plotting, if you're doing forestry, you plot the persona for the tree and the impacts and the risks essentially involved with that. You can also plot people in the process that aren't direct users or direct beneficiaries, but may have impact. So for example, if you're doing fashion, any sort of fashion sustainable work, that you could look at then child labor potentially in one of the suppliers down the tree that you can't necessarily stop, but you can help try and change that. And you map all the unintended consequences, both positive and negative, in that process before you start moving any design work. And that also involves community work in terms of getting any communities that are going to benefit from it involved in the design process early. So Lean really focuses on the outcomes and impact first, rather than the data and the implementation first, which ultimately reverses this flow. So as I said earlier, it becomes much more starting with the intended environmental outcome, then move on to the action you want the user to take, and then you can start figuring out the data requirements and then the actual implementation and the visualization of that data. And hopefully you're only building what you really need to build to create that intended action. In terms of process, then that steps are you define the intended outcome, which is scientific environmental goals and impact goals that you have and you want to achieve, and the outcomes you want to have for the world later. Then you map the critical actions that users need to do to achieve those environmental impacts. And this could be quite complex, involve a lot of organizations, but you map that fully and remove anything that doesn't directly serve those actions. And then you can create your minimum data strategy and understand how you need to collect data, what data you need to collect, how much infrastructure you need, etc. And the same goes there, you cut out anything that is not going to serve the first purpose. And then finally, that's when you can actually design the full implementation, set up the infrastructure, and also design the product, the visualization. But there's also Lean UX is not enough. We feel it's not enough, and there's the mapping you can do to go even further with this.
Right. This is where the planetary boundaries comes in as an additional design lens. So I guess I know there's some design experts in the room, but you were probably also all familiar more or less with UX and Lean UX. And traditionally, it focuses on human users' needs, which means that the pain that you may remove from one user can be moved in this magical place called away, and unfortunately might end up with another person or place somewhere in your supply chain, or somewhere where you don't really know what's happening. This is why we believe that today Lean UX and design as a discipline needs to sit within a new paradigm. So if you're a designer or a founder, the person making design decisions, you need to add another dimension to this Venn diagram. And this dimension is not only human, but also like nature and all the various dimensions of nature and the needs of nature as well. And when you consciously start integrating the needs of users, society, and nature with a system thinking approach, you're entering this realm of what we call regenerative design. So let's look at how this works and where the planetary boundaries can be very useful as a design lens. I'm pretty sure many of you are familiar with planetary boundaries, but just a few, like maybe a definition or a reminder of where they come from. They've been around for a while, actually, for almost 20 years. And the framework was introduced by a team of scientists from the Stockholm Resilience Center, led by a guy called Johan Rockström. And so they identify 9 key Earth system processes that are regulating the planet's stability, essentially keeping the planet livable and in balance. Maybe we can use the chat to do a bit of a quiz to see which planetary boundaries you guys know. And Joe, please let me know what's coming out of chat. It would be interesting for me to see what are the sort of top ones that people come up with.
Yeah, that is quite similar to donut economics, which is true. So
the most common planetary boundaries usually that people know of is climate change. And maybe the second most famous is biodiversity or biosphere integrity. Then you have also ocean acidification, you have chemical pollution. So all the introduction of new molecules like synthetic fertilizer, pesticides, PFAS, all those very nasty things. There is also one on fertilizer use, freshwater withdrawal, land conversion, or the changes in the way that we use land, like usually from forest to field or built plots, air pollution, or it's also called increase in aerosol loading. And the last one, which we also know, is ozone, so the stratospheric ozone depletion, but this one is looking pretty good. So in terms of where we are on planetary boundaries, so there are 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries that are crossed. today. And so as this animation shows, like shit is really hitting the fan in terms of our living system. So we're really entered a world where we're facing interconnected environmental collapse, plus not to mention like resource scarcity and also growing inequality. So essentially, as designers or people making design decisions, we need to change the way we operate because our models are not just outdated, they are actually dangerous. We can no longer afford to design for convenience, aesthetics, or profit alone. And we just need to change dramatically how we design. So how do we do that? Well, the good news is there are some really good tools around to help that are actually related to the planetary boundaries. And the one that we use is the Donut Economics and the Donut Economics Action Lab Toolbox. Anybody familiar with Donut Economics? Yes, maybe
Yes.
you've read.
A couple of people did mention it in the chat earlier.
Yeah. Maybe you read Kate Raworth's book that has given birth to this concept. So Kate Raworth is an economist, and so what she's done, and she's done a fantastic job, is to map the safe and just space for humanity. So you have the outer ring, which you can see here in blue. So that's the ecological ceilings of the 9 planetary boundaries that keep our planet livable. And then you have an inner ring in green, which is about ensuring everyone's essential needs are met. So food, health, housing, education, peace, etc. So what is called the donut is the space between those two rings. And this is essentially what we're saying is that the challenge now is to design solutions that are operating within the donut. So that's safe and just space for humanity. So what you can do as an organization manager, as a product manager, is to map your organization or your service against this donut economics framework. And to do so, you need to answer different questions such as what are the essential social needs that need to be fulfilled with my product in my supply chain? What are the negative impacts that I'm having on planetary boundaries and social needs? What are the positive impacts that I'm having? What are the risks? What are the risks to my business with, runaway climate change or lack of fresh water, for instance, or unmet social needs? And also, what are the opportunities? What can I change to improve the situation? And also, more very importantly, how do all these risks and opportunities evolve over time? Because we know that those crises are unfolding over time, sometimes over years, over decades, or sometimes centuries. So essentially, this is an extremely useful activity to do collaboratively with your team, with your stakeholders, to bring awareness about the issues, the challenges, the opportunity, and to maybe instigate action and change together. And how, so maybe you were wondering, okay, what's it got to do with our data? So how does it translate in terms of data? It helps tackle a couple of challenges. One is integrity and one is actionability. So when it comes to integrity, you can start challenging your data and be like, okay, is my data delivering the systemic outcomes that we need? Is it showing the full picture in terms of impact, or just missing a few positive or negative impacts? Can I add other dimensions, looking at the other planetary boundaries, for instance? Is my data accurate enough to reflect the problem? Am I relying on estimations and models or actually measuring live stuff? And then, are you framing the problem in a comprehensive way enough? Are you just maybe keeping your users in sort of common tunnel vision by not talking about the other impacts on biodiversity, for instance? So can you add some other dimensions? Can you add some co-benefits to your data set? Right, so that's for integrity. And then in terms of, is it actionable? So the questions are we providing the right time dimension? So yes, we have live data, that's great, because it can allow people to act upon it quickly. So always useful to have live data. But do we also have long-term data based on ecological scenarios, such as climate modeling from IPCC? Are we also connecting levers of action? So for instance, can we connect biodiversity enhancement with climate change mitigation and maybe freshwater conservation to motivate people to act even more systemically? Is the message, is the copy also supporting action? So, but that's one of the challenges that using donut economics as a framework can help you tackle. But essentially, there's no simple answers to complex problems. And so as a business owner, as a designer, product manager, you need to embrace that complexity of the problem that you're tackling and make it easier for the users to act upon this complexity. So you need to be prepared for questions such as, do we actually need this product? Or you must be prepared to challenging the problem statement, to reframing the problem, like in this example. So this example is around, okay, how can we get farmers in the UK, for instance, to plant more trees to fight climate change? So if you look at this question with a traditional approach, the how might we question is very easy. So how might we find ways for farmers to plant more trees? Okay, so which means that the solution is going to be, okay, let's plant some monospecific forest, and then the data is going to be very straightforward. The number of trees, the biomass, maybe carbon sequestration, and that's about it. However, if we look at this problem with like a regenerative lens, you might expand your how might we question to how do we design agricultural landscapes that are using methods that benefit farmers' health, financial resilience, soil health, biodiversity, yields, climate resilience. And in that particular case, so your solution will probably be around agroforestry and regenerative agriculture, which means that the data you'll have to capture and monitor will be much wider. It will be soil carbon as well, biodiversity, people's health, chemical pollution, and so on and so on. So at the end of the day, you can combine those two approaches of lean UX and regenerative design and planetary boundaries to assess whether your innovation has this net positive social and environmental impact, helps drive action, and helps create resilience, and therefore is answering the question whether, is it worth designing or building. So now let's explore more concrete ways where this approach has been applied. And we have a couple of case studies. One is in forest monitoring and one is on citizen assemblies. So forest monitoring, as you know, forests are complex ecosystems. You have to monitor a lot of data and a lot of risk as well. And you have to read over a very long time horizons because a forest, a tree lives 70 years. So you have to know what's going to happen in 70 years to plant the right trees today. So in this particular case study, what was interesting, to Joe's point, is that we had a clear intended action that we wanted to drive from forest owners, which was moving them to regenerative forestry practices. Okay, so that was really the key things, because that would also help achieve their two main goals, empowering them to create resilience to climate change and maximize long-term sequestration, which would also help with the financial viability of the project, which would be financed through carbon credits. Okay, so the company we were working with was an MRV company. So MRV means measure, report, verify. And so they had lots of data, which looked pretty much like this. And the challenge was to bring it to life in a way that would be actionable for the forest owners and managers. So this is the dashboard. We did a research, we spoke to forest owners, managers, and so on, worked with the product and tech team to create this dashboard, which is very versatile. And this is the sort of exact summary view that surfaces the key data that people need to see the past, present, and future condition of their forest. So it's customizable, but you have the key stuff you need. So the value of your wood, the biomass value, the carbon credits value, and then you can drill down on the map and see each plot, what type of trees are there. You can also look at the total biomass per tree species and have the net sequestration of the forest. And what's really interesting is that the data was embedding some climate scenario modeling. And so you could look at what would happen in the next 70 or 80 years according to different IPCC scenarios. So this is really what really is interesting in this one is that you have very within, maybe 5 seconds, you see, okay, oh, wow, there's interesting stuff in my forest. So you grab the attention of your users. Then we also, on top of that exact summary view, we also design some alerting functions to make sure people were made aware of any risk of pest, fire, or logging. And most importantly, there was an area where people could drill down, get all the data they wanted, and also add some forestry practices attached to the data. So, and in this particular case, that was the sort of killing, leap from data to action, because people knew that based on the data, the solution was to cut down all the trees and plant new ones, and plant different types of species that were also more resilient to climate change. That would mean drier conditions for this particular forest. So this really helped join the dots between the intended action and the design process to make sure that at the end of the day, the forest owners were implementing more regenerative practices for the benefit of their forest in terms of climate and also financial resilience. And Joe is going to present a totally different case study around citizen assemblies.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. So this was on a public engagement case study. As Marie said, a citizen assembly in conjunction with UCL and Lancaster Uni, and hopefully to inform the government on policy change. So the idea here, the intended action really was for the citizens to evaluate their choices, their behaviour choices, and understand the level of collective behaviour change needed to meet the UK's energy demands and reach net zero, and the impact of their choices. So it really started the model behind it from the UCL could really churn out ample amount of data. Just kind of the choices were infinite in terms of what we could do. So we really wanted the team to focus on, okay, what is it these citizens needed to be able to evaluate their behaviour? And what we focused on was a set of scenarios that we modeled in the background, and those scenarios would have data attached to it, and we visualised data, but we really focused on stimulating the conversation in the assembly by framing the scenario first and what the outcomes of that scenario were, and then letting them drill down into the data to understand it more about their impacts. There was also a data challenge that with energy demand, and maybe some of you are aware that it's numbers that are astronomically high. It's hard to grasp. Gigawatts per hour. It's unfathomable sometimes. So we really try to focus with the team in terms of the data team to understand how can we make that tangible. We consulted some assembly members that had a co-design session with us to understand, okay, what sort of tangible examples would make it understandable for them, or more understandable for them. We had some examples here of it's the energy demand generated based on that every UK household. If all the energy went into that one household, how many years would they run for? So try to make it more interesting for them, more understandable for them, and also a bit of fun. So we've got a toast example there just for to add a bit of enjoyment and for the day. And then we also try to localize data. The citizens assembly session being held was in the north of England. So instead of using some abstract city they didn't understand, we defaulted to Manchester as an area they knew and understood. And then for example, this is talking about land usage for renewables, and the scale, the size would change depending on their scenario choice. And then really grounded that with, okay, what does that mean compared to Manchester, the size of Manchester? So we really try to transfer the data from just quantitative numbers to actual concrete examples so that they could understand and feed the discussion in the assembly to hopefully inform decisions later.
And I remember someone asked in the chat tips about communication as well. I think this touches on first, this psychological barrier of things. When things feel too remote, people don't act on them. So this is a really good example of how you can do the storytelling with stories that are really near to people's heart, like physically and emotionally, and that helps driving action. So there's also, I'm slightly digressing, but there's also been a really interesting survey in the UK on people's attitude to things like net zero and all this policy stuff. But when the bottom line is when people understand that there is demonstrable impact for their community, for people like them, it really helps with engagement. And this is a really good example that has been designed for that purpose, and that really helps with the storytelling and the engagement. I think that's it for case studies, Joe, right?
Yes.
I mean, we have way more, but I think we're going to probably pause there.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions or wants to get some tips from a design point of view or service design point of view, then feel free to drop me a message and book me a meeting. I'm happy to chat. And yeah, I think I will share with Mary, will share some resources afterwards that are useful. There's some sustainable UX frameworks and templates I will share afterwards for that.
It's time to conclude our session today with a little quote. If you have the power to design anything, you have the responsibility to design within the donut. I think we will leave you with this thought. Thank you again for your time. You have our contact details. You can follow us on LinkedIn as well. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with myself or Joe. Thank you for your time, your amazing contribution, and keep on the good work.